The old theory that declared that the government best serves the individual by absolute laissez-faire no longer satisfies. The new theory is that the people, in their collective capacity, have the right to curb the power of the individual capitalist whenever he threatens the welfare of the people at large.
You might be thinking, how did they resurrect Teddy Roosevelt from the grave for this podcast? Well, truth be told, that was not the actual TR. No, we brought in some reinforcements to help us to bring history to life today.
I had to cover my mouth from laughing so hard because that is the perfect Teddy Roosevelt voice. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we have got him today. He is here, our colleague, our fellow APUSHer, our fellow podcaster is here. 3 makes a party. And now, along with Dr. Garrison, Miss Keltner, our third member of APUSH for All, Mr. Hill.
Oh, what a nice introduction.
Welcome to the pod,
true.
Mr. Hill.
You know what? It's lovely to be here.
So, Mr. Help us understand that quote you so eloquently just read.
Absolutely. Well, Roosevelt was the embodiment of the progressive era, a time when reformers challenged the idea that businesses and the wealthy could operate without government oversight. It was an era of trust-busting, labor rights, and expanded democracy. His words capture the very essence of what was happening in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. Let's say I was an APUSH student and I wanted to analyze the quote that we just did. I would, to use APUSH cool lingo, I would use HIP.
Right.
HIPP.
Hip it real good.
Hip, real good. So what does HIP stand for? It stands for historical context, intended audience, the author's purpose, and the author's point of view, in which this case I would probably go for author's point of view. And Roosevelt's point of view is that government must be used as an instrument for change, a direct repudiation of the hands-off approach that he described in the quote.
Yeah, and so this is a great way to kick off episode 2 because, we're talking about some pretty progressive movements happening in America right now.
Yeah, episode 2 is really progressing the podcast. You get it? You guys get it?
Yeah.
That was really good.
So welcome back to APUSH for All, everybody. We had so much success with episode 1, thanks to everybody who listened, and we are very excited today to dive into the progressive era, which is roughly 1890 to 1920 because chronology
matters.
Thank you. Very good job. So this is a time when reformers across the country are trying to figure out how do we fix all of these problems that came about during the Gilded Age because of industrialization. And it's really going to be middle-class professionals, journalists, women, and even politicians who are going to push for changes to combat the problems of the Gilded Age.
Right. So we're trying to figure out how does the country address systematically the problems of industrialization, urbanization, political corruption. These are forces that are disrupting American society. So we're going to look at muckraking journalists trying to trust bust some of these mega monopolies, women's suffrage, how do we end child labor laws. The progressive era is about this explosion of reform.
Yeah, and as always, we'll try to make some connections to today because, let's be real, many of these fights are still happening today, kind of like the fight against tuberculosis. If you guys saw that in the news this week.
Yeah, that's topical.
Yeah.
Very topical.
This is topical. The progressive movement falls under period 7 of the APUSH framework, linking to major themes like politics and power, reform movements, economic change, social justice, and it follows the period of American history known as the Gilded Age. So the Gilded Age, the phrase itself was coined by Mark Twain, famous Missourian, and Twain was talking about the corruption and the dysfunction underneath the surface of a shiny...
We get it. We get it.
Oh. Do you guys want me to explain?
No,
What about how Mark Twain got his nom de plume?
No, we're fine. Let's not pontificate too much, Garrison.
Okay. I think a lot of people would like to know.
Well, I think we should keep going.
Leave it in the comments if you want me to talk about Mark Twain's nom de plume going forward.
Okay, anyway, so the Gilded Age left the United States with extreme wealth inequality, urban squalor, corporate monopolies, and corrupt political machines. So really our question for the progressive era is going to be, how do you fix a system that favors the powerful?
And progressives, many of these are from the growing middle class, right? Thank you, industrial capitalism, for creating this new managing middle class. They believe that scientific expertise and professional leadership could now be trained on society to bring rational solutions to these social problems. This was the rise of the so-called professions like doctors, lawyers, engineers, and these social workers who see reform as this duty, that those who have education, those who belong to this rising middle class should step in and do their duty.
Yeah, and the belief that this professional and well-managed group of people could reform things also extended to politics. So the famous governor of Wisconsin, probably the most famous progressive that there was, progressive politician at least, that was not a president, has to be Robert La Follette. That's how I say his name.
La Follette.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, La Follette. Fightin' Bob.
Or for our French speakers, La Follette.
La Follette.
La Follette.
As long as you said at the end, then people would know you're French.
Very good.
Yeah, so Fightin' Bob, he became one of the strongest progressive voices in politics during this time, and he came up with his idea of the Wisconsin idea.
Yeah.
The Wisconsin. Sometimes I
it
just
was an
shorten it to
idea,
the Wisconsin.
And he lives in Wisconsin.
Yes, and so it bears the name, the Wisconsin idea. And this promoted the idea that governments should regulate industry, they should regulate tax reform, they should put in direct primaries to be a model of reform across the country. And Garrison, did you know that you and Bob have something in common?
Really?
Yes. So Fightin' Bob originally was horrible at public speaking. He mumbled, he lacked confidence, but he became hypnotized by a doctor and it cured his nerves and he became one of the most powerful orators of his time.
Yeah, and I too was hypnotized as a young man and am now a powerful orator. So
Well, better.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say
you should see some of my students.
better. It's gotten better.
Yeah, right. So thank you for that. When we're talking about how did society become convinced that some of these progressives were on the right track, we can go to one of the most powerful tools in the progressives' toolbox, and that was journalism. You had these muckrakers, that's what Theodore Roosevelt called them, right? Because they're literally wading through the muck of society. They were investigative reporters who exposed corruption. They wrote novels. They took pictures, and they just wanted to reveal to society the injustice that was all around.
Hey, you guys, joke time. You ready?
Okay.
I wrote this for
Let's
this
go.
week.
It's going to be good.
Okay. What did the two cans of spoiled meat say to each other?
What?
I don't know.
I think we're about to get exposed.
Oh, my gosh.
But
Oh, man, it fell flat.
that was
Yeah.
that was brilliant.
Tough crowd.
I
So
loved it.
Upton Sinclair wrote a book called The Jungle, not The Jungle Book, but The Jungle. He was a famous muckraker from this time. He wrote this book in 1906, and it famously revealed the horrors of the meatpacking industry, which would lead to changes through government legislation like the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act.
And if you guys have ever read any parts of The Jungle, it's nasty. It's good nasty.
You got something for us?
It's a good nasty read. So one of my favorite parts, and I quote, this is from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor, in the dirt and sawdust, where the workers had tramped and spit uncounted billions of consumption germs. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of the dried dung of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then the rats, the bread, and the meat would go into the hoppers together. This is no fairy story and no joke. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was but a tidbit.
I don't like it. I don't know if I can have meat the rest of the day.
I'm going to be okay. You just can't ever try to find out how the sausage gets made. Just don't think about it.
I think I'll probably have a rat steak tonight.
Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
It'd be delicious. So that's truly horrific and traumatizing. But hey, what about like Ida Tarbell? She took on John D. Rockefeller, exposing Standard Oil's monopolistic. Wait, did I say monopolistic? Monopolistic.
I was going to say, is that
monolithic, monopolistic?
There's a lot of monos
Yeah.
right there.
It's been a long week.
It's been going around.
Monopolistic practices, and this helped lead to the breakup of one of the largest companies, most powerful companies in the world, through antitrust laws. Ms. Keltner, what antitrust laws are we talking about here?
Well, the first one would be the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, which did allow the federal government the power to start breaking up some of these monopolies. The problem with it is that it was difficult to enforce, or the government just really chose not to enforce it. So it's not until we get the Clayton Antitrust Act of the 20th century, which actually put some teeth into the original Sherman Antitrust Act, and that is going to bring down Standard Oil by 1911. And one thing that Standard Oil did, which Teddy Roosevelt would have called Standard Oil a bad trust. He had this idea of good versus bad trust, but Standard Oil would lower their oil prices so much that their competitors would have to do the same thing just to stay in competition with them. But then, because the oil prices were so low, their competitors wouldn't be able to survive making such little money. So once those competitors went out of business, Standard Oil would turn around and hike up those prices big time, which is
a little horizontal integration there.
Illegal today.
Right? They're going to buy them out.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Good for Standard Oil, not good for consumers or competitors.
So Standard Oil is just one of many of these monopolies that is targeted by some of these antitrust laws. There's going to be varying degrees of success. But ultimately, what's maybe most important is this idea that the government can step in and regulate big business has taken hold and supported by many Americans.
Another thing going on during the Progressive Era, besides just trying to curb the power and influence of big business, was something called the social gospel movement, which tried to connect Christian morals, ethics, values to social reform. And religious leaders argued that faith demanded action to help the poor, which inspired reforms around labor, housing, and public health.
Right, and that philosophy influenced reformers like the famous Jane Addams, who's going to found Hull House in Chicago, with this goal of providing education, job training, childcare for immigrants, because none of these services existed until private citizens said, you know what, we're going to step in and make sure that there's some type of safety net for all of these new Americans arriving.
Yeah, which is why a lot of the progressive reformers are upper middle class educated people, because those are the ones who had the money, the means, the time to devote to these issues. And we have been to the Hull House, Mr. Hill.
We certainly have. Back in 2018, we were there for a conference. And
we left the conference to go to the Hull House, which
we did.
Was still very educational and I think probably more connected to
we
what
listen.
we
just wanted to go.
Anyway.
We just wanted to go right to the source.
Shout out Jane Addams. Shout out Social Studies Department.
Shout out our then colleague Robert Snidman and his karaoke rendition of.
There was also karaoke, not at the Hull House.
Not at the Hull House. They don't permit
the Hull House.
They do not permit that kind of nonsense at the Hull House. But we did engage in some karaoke, and I believe it was the Beastie Boys.
It was the Beastie Boys.
Which, how progressive is this? When the song that they were playing that we were karaokeing to was "You Gotta Fight
For
your right.
To pause.
No. The original lyrics were like, you got to fight for your right to have the government help you out.
Right.
It didn't flow
the
as
Beastie Boys
well.
were very progressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've established that. So,
Meanwhile, outside of the Whole House, outside of karaoke, progressives are also fighting to expand democracy. So political reform is a big goal. One thing that gets passed is the 17th Amendment gets added to the U.S. Constitution, which is going to allow voters at the state level to elect their senators to Washington, D.C., not state legislatures. And this was a really big reform, something that the Populist Party had advocated for in the 1890s. Other political tools that states adopted were the initiative, the referendum, the recall, which all still exist today in various forms in different states, which gives citizens more direct power over laws and elected officials.
Yeah, Mr. Hill, would you mind maybe putting on your Founding Fathers wig and explain why U.S. senators were not originally elected by the people?
Luckily, I did bring my Founding Fathers wig with me.
Perfect.
I gotta find it in my bag.
Good thing it's a podcast.
It does. What does it look like?
Not recorded.
Okay, all right.
Filmed.
Founding Fathers wig is placed, and I will now say in the words what the Founding Fathers were thinking by initially denying the people the right to directly elect their senators. Esteemed gentlemen, let us not be so naive as to entrust the sacred duty of senatorial selection to the fickle whims of the unrefined masses. The common man, though virtuous in his toil, is oft swayed by passion, ignorance, and the empty rhetoric of demagogues. It is therefore the solemn charge of the enlightened state legislatures, those bastions of wisdom and reason, to appoint senators who shall safeguard the republic from the tempestuous tides of popular caprice. Only through such measured governance may we preserve the delicate balance of our noble experiment in democracy.
Hear, hear. Right? No, you don't like that.
I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? Elitist? Is it pragmatist for the founders?
I mean, this is a tricky one. Think about most of the voters in this time period, fairly illiterate, not a lot of information and connection to the modern world. There's not a lot of public education going on out there. Do you want to trust this great experiment to your neighbor Steve down the street who can't read?
Okay, it's Steven.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Apologies. Right. But I mean, think about it. Is that do we feel okay with that?
It's classic Hamiltonianism, and Jefferson would say, no, sturdy yeoman farmers, despite the fact that they might be illiterate, they have to be the backbone. And am I allowed to take a side here, either Hamilton or Jefferson on this?
Yeah, we encourage sides. We encourage
I'm going to
division.
go, from my experience in standing in the line to vote, I'm going to go with Hamilton on this. I think he got it a little bit more right than Jefferson did.
There's a strong argument.
That's...
Mr. Hill's an elitist.
Well,
sounds like Ms. Kellner, you disagree. Make a claim statement.
Well, I mean, I think we should all remember that someone like me could not even vote at this point in history yet.
Yikes.
Ooh, she had to bring that up.
Oh, that's a good point. Kind of mic drop there. So I think that is a good transition because, I mean, we're going to do a longer episode on this topic at some point. But for now, I think it's really important to note that women's rights were actually central to the progressive agenda. And the 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, was the result of decades of activism. You got leaders like Carrie Chapman Catt pushing for constitutional amendments. Alice Paul, the National Women's Party, is taking this really radical approach and they're organizing these protests, hunger strikes. It's really amazing.
Oh, yeah, it is so amazing. And I just want to thank you for mansplaining the history of my right to vote to me.
Right. I just want you to know that when we do get to this own episode, I am an ally and I want to elevate your voice.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I think we're going to have some esteemed guests on that episode.
I'm looking forward to it.
I learned a new sound that day, a sound more horrible than description can picture, the thud of a speeding, living body on a stone sidewalk. Thud, dead. Thud, dead. Thud, dead. Thud, dead. I call them that because the sound and the thought of death came to me each time at the same instant. There was plenty of chance to watch them as they came down. The height was 80 feet.
Wow. That was William G. Shepard from the Milwaukee Journal, March 27th, 1911. Wow. So, Mr. Hill, you're kind of bumming me out.
The truth hurts, my friend.
He's right. He is referring to one of the most tragic events of the Progressive era, which was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. And this was a factory in New York which employed mostly young immigrant women, and it happened to be kind of a death trap just because of the lack of safety measures put in place for employees, the lack of regulations to put anything like that into place. So what happened in 1911 at this factory was that the owners locked the doors to prevent unauthorized breaks from the employees. And so when a fire broke out in the factory, workers were trapped inside. They had no way of getting out because of that locked door. And
surely there were sprinklers, though, right?
No sprinklers.
What?
Nothing. Nope. Nothing of the sort. And so, unfortunately, this fire breaks out. They can't get out. And so some end up jumping from the 9th floor of the factory to escape. And those who stayed inside ended up burning to death. And in total, 146 people died.
And I remember watching this video. And this
you
is
remember?
I remember being
you remember
there.
being there.
Listen,
you remember 1911.
Listen, I am older than you guys, so I remember what it was like. No. But they also said, the women, it was a choice. You were going to either stay or and burn to death, or you were going to, throw yourself from the 9th floor. And there were iron fences at the bottom, and so these,
getting worse.
a crowd gathers, and you see not only these women jumping, but then you also see them impaling themselves on these fences. I cannot think of anything more horrific than that. And understandably, the public outrage was immense. It led to new workplace safety laws, including fire codes, building inspections, labor protections. It was a major victory for the progressive movement, albeit it came at a tragic cost. Not to mention giving us one of the most morbid narrations in school video history. Thud.
Yeah.
Dead.
Right.
Can I say it one more time?
I think you should.
Thud. Dead.
We're going to be in a lot of people's nightmares tonight.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, well, there's no really easy way to transition from that kind of a tragic event, but maybe this is also a tragic event for some people during the Progressive era, because another reform was something called prohibition, and there were many progressives who believed that alcohol fueled crime, poverty, domestic violence, and this was something that was not new to the Progressive era, but something that had been advocated for ever since the antebellum period.
Right. It's almost like the Progressive era gave oxygen to this fire, right, that had been burning for quite a while. Groups like the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Maybe fire's not the best thing to use right now.
Too soon?
Because of the Triangle. Yeah. This is why people call me insensitive.
Yeah.
The Anti-Saloon League push for national prohibition. So you've got all these groups that see their opportunity and they strike while the iron is hot.
Again.
Okay, I'm gonna.
That wasn't
Sorry.
even in.
Wow.
I mean, we loosely have a
the
script because of moments like this, but I mean that wasn't even in the script, and you still can't help yourself.
My subconscious. I don't know.
Wow.
Okay, so here's what happens. There's this 18th Amendment in 1919. This is prohibition, right? We know ultimately that prohibition doesn't actually work. One of my favorite statistics is that more people drank during Prohibition than before Prohibition.
Is that true? I've heard
I just said it, so I think it is.
No, because I really have heard that some people think that that's a myth.
I think I've also heard that like 73% of statistics are made up on the spot. So who's to say?
I mean, I do it in class all the time.
Right. I mean, I lie constantly. Whatever the case, Prohibition is this force in society that leads to all kinds of unintended consequences. Maybe someday you'll get its own podcast talking about the rise of Al Capone and the illicit trade of alcohol and all the crazy speakeasies that go along with it. But for us right now, to contextualize this, prohibition is part of the progressive movement. It ends during the Great Depression, so we will get there and talk about that in another episode. All right, so what's the legacy of the progressive era?
I think the progressive era is really the first time we see in the United States a much bigger activist government. And they're going to start taking on these issues of corporate regulation, workers' rights, women's equality, and in racial justice, which we'll get to in another episode. And all of these things are still being debated today in 2025.
Right. I mean, the 8-hour workday, minimum wage, workers' comp, the idea that public education should be provided for free, like things like reduced lunches, these are all products of the progressive movement. And all these issues are still widely enjoyed, but also debated. Because at the core of all of this is this question, what is the role of government in an individual's life? Like, American identity insists that anyone can succeed. And that's awesome. But there's also this belief in a level playing field. In the Gilded Age, industrial capitalism kind of created the opposite. So should the government intervene and try to level things back out?
Yeah, and it's not just individuals who are being affected by all this. Just like Roosevelt, attempting to break up Standard Oil and then that actually happening under Taft's presidency, or today's government investigating the likes of Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple for monopoly power. Also, the question of labor rights. Where do workers fit into all of this? And the rise of workers and union fights at Starbucks and Amazon. I think these all echo progressive era struggles.
As we begin to wrap up, we'd like to thank our sponsors.
Of course, we first have to thank Junior Java, a student-led coffee and tea company with a mission to make education more equitable worldwide. Every purchase helps kids in need. Fuel your studies and support a great cause. Check out juniorjavacoffee.com to shop and learn more.
Thanks, Junior Java, for keeping us and history brewing.
So good. We also like to thank Cats and Family Dentistry, Scrawny Arms Farm, the Healthcare Group for Women, and our newest sponsor, Right On Ruben Schlansky, College Essay Tutoring. You can find them on the web. So as always, we are honored by their support.
All right, let's summarize and get out of here. The progressive era reshaped America through government regulation, expanded democracy, labor laws, and civil rights activism.
And so for the APUSH exam, focus on trust busting. Standard Oil is a great example to bring up if you ever need something as a piece of evidence for an LEQ, an SAQ, a DBQ. Also, of course, women's suffrage. The men on the podcast have promised that women's suffrage will get its own episode. And the social gospel, political reforms, and also labor laws.
Are we prepping for a second progressive era? I mean, we'll see.
No. We're prepping for more of a Gilded Age heading into. But more on that later.
Yeah, stay tuned. Meanwhile, thanks for listening to APUSH for All. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. We're on Spotify, Apple iTunes. We're going to be on YouTube soon. Just got to figure that out. If you got a topic you want us to cover, send us a message on Instagram at APUSH for All.
Until next time, keep learning from yesterday to make sense of today.